Mark Vamos, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Steve. Good to see you.
Hi.
I'm curious what you saw in terms of student demand for your program at CUNY over the years. Was it rising? Was it falling? And if so, why? We were always sort of surprised in my program at how many students we got and how those numbers were increasing at a time when, as you said, newsrooms were imploding. And we sometimes thought that that was because you shouldn't trust 19-year-olds to make rational economic decisions. But I was just wondering what you've seen.
Well, I stepped down at the end of 2013, so it's been a number of years, even though I'm still on the foundation board and I'm in touch with Sarah Bartlett, who's the dean. So I have some sense of what's going on. Look, we always looked for students who wanted to be journalists because they had a passion for journalism, not because they thought this was the best way to earn a living, not because to make their parents happy. It was because you had a passion to do journalism. And that's what we looked for in our admissions process. Yeah, we gave them the tests and all that, and we looked for some experience and writing ability and so forth. But we didn't have any trouble finding these students. It was very, very heartening. And when the technology really changed, Facebook really is what, 2005, 2006, not that long ago. That when the technology changed, the demand went up because graduate students wanted to learn the new technologies, and they thought going to graduate school, journalism was a good way to do it. So we never had trouble attracting a large pool of applicants, and we could be selective. There were so many applicants that we could really build ourselves a very nice class. And by the way, diversity was very important. So we were looking for students who came from diverse backgrounds, economically, racially, ethnically, to build a diverse class, because we thought one of the problems of journalism was there was not enough diversity in the profession. So we didn't have any trouble and still don't. And we've added a degree. We had a basic MA in journalism, and now we have a degree in social journalism. And the school has expanded. There are all kinds of offshoots and special programs and stuff. So it hasn't been a problem.
Chad, can you unmute Alan Dodds-Frank and David Alpern? They both have questions. And then I'm going to retake the floor. I want to finish my questions for Steve.
Hi, Steve. Thank you. I'm wondering whether you think that, in fact, part of what was uncovered about people's anger was how it was being stoked, particularly by right-wing Christian radio. And in terms of the fairness doctrine, more like the Citizens United decision that allowed dark money to create all these nefarious campaigns. People didn't know the source of what was fueling the culture wars.
Yeah, it's hard for me to answer that question because I think a lot of things were going on at once. Social media really did change everything. And yes, there was funding of right-wing media, but there was also funding of left-wing media. It's hard for me to answer why the doubts got worse, whether it was because of the politicization and the funding of right-wing media changed things. I don't know. Alan, tell me what you meant.
Well, I mean, I guess I think part of what was uncovered was not just the blue collar anger on the right among working class. I think it was what was the root cause of that. I mean, to me, Trump was undercovered as a celebrity. That was his appeal to people because everybody wants to identify with the celebrity. I mean, and to take the 2020 elections that you've talked about, it seemed to me the Democrats completely went to sleep on the notion that the Republicans were going to run perky right-wing women in all those, most of those races that were won by women because the Democrats didn't use the power of women. I didn't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's always hard to explain whether Republicans did well because they were doing well or because the Democrats were doing so badly. I think the Democrats really blew it in both elections, frankly. And even though there was a lot of right-wing money, if the Democrats had been on their game and not had been so negligent in understanding what was coming from what used to be their base, which is blue-collar workers, was the Democratic base, and they had no idea what was going on. And that's a failing of the Democrats, independent of what the Republicans might have been doing by funding right-wing media.
David Alpern, you can go next, and then Bill Holstein, you've had your hand raised. I apologize.
Well,
I didn't call it.
It's a minority view, Paula. You skipped over Steve's years at Newsweek, so I just wondered
All right.
briefly what he gained from that experience.
Well,
Newsweek? What's Newsweek?
What was Newsweek is the question.
yeah, that's right. I mean, well, the first thing is I met my wife at Newsweek, as you know, and we've been married for 40 plus years now. So Newsweek will always have a fond spot in my heart. Newsweek barely exists. It's just a great tragedy to me that once there were 3 news magazines, Time, Newsweek, and US News, 2 of them essentially gone. Newsweek, which had a 3 million circulation as recently as the year 2007, has about 50,000 circulation and barely exists. US News is essentially done except for the college stuff. And Time, which still exists and sometimes does good stuff, is really just a shadow of what it used to be. And it's really very, very sad. And it didn't have to be this way, you know, because The Economist did very well in this period of time. The New Yorker did very well. It didn't have to happen the way it did. And it's very sad. I enjoyed my time at Newsweek. I was national affairs editor for 5 years, as you know, and it was just great fun. I learned a lot about journalism. I learned a lot about politics. And I'm sorry if I didn't talk a little more about Newsweek earlier. Great to see you, David.
I thought I mentioned it, but it's in my notes, but I must have skipped over it. Okay, Bill Holstein, you're up.
Well, great to see you all, and what a lot of memories and what a lot of passion went into these things we created together. Steve, what can be done about social media now in practical context? Section 230 of the Fairness Doctrine, what can be done to bring about a better balance of power between those in the media who have some sense of responsibility versus those in the media who are just trying to play to the extremes, and the algorithms take over. The algorithms exacerbate the differences. So what can we do? What can you lead us toward any possible answer?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. I think that Facebook and Google and the rest of them need to pay the providers of content, the creators of content, to use their news on their feeds or their stories or their analysis. And this is starting to happen. We just saw in Australia, the Australian government passed legislation that requires social media, Facebook, Google, and the rest, to negotiate with the content providers and come to an agreement in which they pay the content providers for the use of their content. And if they don't come to an agreement, it goes to arbitration, which becomes binding. We saw in Germany that Axel Springer, which publishes the largest newspaper in Germany, refused to give any content to Facebook because they were not satisfied with the compensation they were getting from Facebook. So I think we're going to see an increased demand in the United States and elsewhere around the world for Facebook and the others to pay for the use of their content. Right now, Facebook's position is, look, we provide a link and we send traffic back to you, and you can monetize that traffic by selling advertising. This is true up to a point, but it is wildly insufficient. If you go back and look at the number that I cited earlier, the 80% of digital advertising revenue is going to social media, not to the content providers, you can see what the problem is. So the answer has to be over time to have social media be paying for the content that they are using, pay the content creators for the content that they are using, which is generally speaking not now the case.
Don't you hate this phrase, content? We used to call it news, but now it's called content.
I know, we're content providers. We used to be journalists, yes.
Ban that word.